5, 4,
3, 2, 1.
All right, well, thank you again for being here this evening. Thank you to all those who are here in person, those who are joining online. We welcome you here this evening. Well, we are on session 3, so go ahead and turn there now in your booklets if you would like to. Last week, we went over who God is, knowing full well that we basically just dipped our pinky toe into the vast ocean that is that question. So we covered just a few of the attributes, including omnipotence. What does omnipotence mean? Someone who was here last week. And feverish turning of pages.
able to do everything except.
All-powerful. Omni coming from the Latin word meaning all, potent meaning powerful. We also talked about his omniscience. What does omniscient mean?
All knowledge.
All-knowing, containing all knowledge. Yes, we talked about his omnipresence. What does that mean? God is all over the place. And then we also covered his omnibenevolence. For some of us, I was told this is a new one. What does omnibenevolent mean?
Good.
All good. Perfect. So for this session, we're going to cover what is commonly known as wisdom literature. This is going to encapsulate the book of Job, the book of Proverbs, and the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, my plan is to spend probably 75% of our time in Job and then also dabble into Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. But if we don't go through all of that, then that's how we'll start next week. So I want to move at a good pace, but I also recognize that these are really big books with a whole lot of information, and I believe they have a whole lot for us as well. And so let's go ahead and let's get started. Somebody on this side, on this table, give me a 20-second synopsis of the story of Job. 10 to 20 seconds of what happens in the book of Job. Catastrophe, one-word answer. Yeah?
Open mouth, insert foot.
Yeah, and then do that for 40 chapters and then find out what happens.
Life is good, life is bad, life is good.
Life is good. That's good. I like that. So Job is the story of a righteous man who loses what he holds most dear. And he seems to be the perfect example of unjustified punishments, unjustified suffering, unknown suffering, all these other things. Central to the book of Job is the question of why do people who are innocent suffer? And there's a lot of questions that get brought up, but what we're going to focus on is the question about the righteousness of a loving God and the question of, is God just? So we could spend a whole lot of time on this, but let's focus on this from the perspective of the question of, is God just? Is God righteous? The structure of the book of Job is actually pretty simple. It's broken down into 4 parts. We have the prologue, which is like the introduction, huge section, which is the conversation with Job's friends, God's response, and then the epilogue, which is kind of like the conclusion. And so in the very first chapter, this is the prologue, we find out who Job is. And of all the things that he is, we find out that he is blameless. That does not mean that he is without sin. That does not mean that he is perfect. It means that whatever's coming next, he is not to blame for it. And so we get this introduction into Job. And in the very first few verses, we see that he goes so far as to do burnt offerings early in the morning, according to the number of his children, just to be safe. So what we get from Job is he is going above and beyond. This would kind of be like if somebody drove to church every morning and prayed for their kids. They went out of their way. They're making the effort to do this. But then, in Job chapter 1, verse 6, the story gets weird very quickly. We are transported into what seems like some sort of divine courthouse, some sort of divine hearing, like a mission control. And you have the sons of God. Some translations are just going to say that these are angels, and they're all having a conversation. So maybe this is to some degree how God orders his universe. We're not really sure. But in the middle of the conversation, this being, this person shows up. Do we remember who that is?
Satan.
Satan. Very good. The Lord asks Satan a weird question. Where have you been? Now, we remember from last week, it's not that God doesn't have that knowledge, but he's presenting a case before Satan. And Satan says that I have been to and fro all over the earth. So we're getting a little bit of information as to what Satan's been up to, what's been going on. And then God says, have you noticed my servant Job? He's a really, really good guy. He does really, really good stuff. And then almost immediately what Satan does is what Satan does. He takes something good and he twists it and he turns it. And he points it back to God and says, maybe the only reason that Job is good and blameless is because you've made things so easy for him. You have placed a hedge of protection around him. And so because of that, he is well taken care of and he makes good choices. So what happens is Satan is presenting a conflict. And he wages a challenge. But because Satan is challenging the faithfulness of a follower, the challenge can only be defeated, can only be combated by the faithfulness of that follower. We're going to go through this quite a bit in just a couple weeks, but Satan does not challenge God to an arm wrestling contest. If so, God wins. It's not a trivia test. It's not a trivia game. God wins. This is the faithfulness of your follower is in question. How will he respond? And so the response is fine. Do whatever, but just don't touch Job. And so in the very first chapter, we see exactly what Daryl said. We have a guy who has everything, and he loses everything. And so in the early chapter of Job, the main character loses his power, his protection, his provisions, his sons, and his daughters. Raiders have attacked. Everything, his children, his livestock, his property, has been lost. The world that was once perfect and wonderful now becomes perfectly miserable. By the end of the story, Job is homeless, friendless, childless, naked, ulcerous, and in utter and complete despair. So like many of us who are reading and walking through this story, Job is hungering for the answer to one of life's most important and prominent questions. Why? Why is this happening? How could you let this happen? Why is it that bad things seem to happen to good people? Why is it that evil seems to prosper? Why would a good God allow something so unjust? And so in the very beginning, we have this prologue. And then for a while, we sit with Job's friends. And Job is questioning all these things, and he's processing all these things. But then the friends start talking. And what happens is we have 3 different cycles which make up a majority of the book. And this is how it's going to go, right? So it's going to go from Job to one of his friends, to Job, to another friend, back to the beginning, back to another friend, over and over and over again for 3 full cycles. And the main questions that are coming up is God truly just? How does God run the universe? And why is Job suffering? So we're going to look at some of these friends to a little bit of a closer look here.
Don't forget his wife.
His wife.
He still had her.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things is during this story, Job's wife says, why don't you just curse God and die and be done with it? We have this tendency to say, well, that stinks, right? What an unsupportive wife. We have to remember that the wife is experiencing everything that Job is also experiencing.
Good point.
And is coming to a different conclusion and is struggling in a different way, right? So the wife has hit very similar despair, but is coming to a different conclusion. Whereas Job is not perfect, but he's blameless before God. The wife is also a victim of losing everything to test the husband, right? So we got to be careful with how we treat Job's wife.
Sure.
And it's very similar to how when somebody is just nasty out of nowhere, typically it's not out of nowhere. It's coming from something. It's coming from somewhere. Some sort of thing, and you're just experiencing, you're just feeling the talons, and you're the one who's getting bit from it, right? So the first friend that we're introduced to is Eliphaz, okay? Job chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, I think, really wraps around what Eliphaz's entire perspective is on the matter. He says, in Job chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, remember who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble will reap the same. Okay? So Eliphaz's motivation is some sort of piety or some sort of devotion. I would argue it's not necessarily faith that this friend possesses, but it's more like a religious machine. Okay? The machine doesn't really allow for feelings. It seems to give simple, surface level answers. And so Eliphaz is trying to figure out how this could happen to Job. And he's concluding that Job did something wrong. I've been curious, what would happen if we read, or if you met someone who read the story of Job, but they skipped the first chapter? So they don't know what we know. What kind of conclusions would they come to? Because we're told very, very clearly, very plainly, that Job is blameless. There's this thing going on in God's inner court, and now he loses everything. Would we come to a similar conclusion as the friends if we didn't have this information? Be an interesting test. At the end of Eliphaz's last cycle, he's going to go as far as to accuse Job of not providing water to the thirsty and food for the hungry. So in chapter 22, verse 9, Eliphaz is going to say that Job must have sent the widows away empty-handed and crushed the arms of orphans. That's the only way that Eliphaz can make sense out of how bad things have gotten and how fast they got out of hand. Job must have done something terrible. And we see from the New Testament, what are the two primary people groups that are the most vulnerable and need to be taken care of? The widows and the orphans, right? And so there's this charge that obviously, Job, you're doing things wrong, right? So these accusations, we know that they're wrong, but these are what's going to suffice for Eliphaz to incur the wrath of God. You had to have done these things. So for me, when I'm reading this, Eliphaz kind of comes across like the friend who you're not sure is even really your friend, but is willing to offer a lot of advice. Right? Yeah, do we know people like that? So maybe Eliphaz is like Job's Facebook friend. Doesn't really know him, but is quick to type a response to everything that's going on.
Well, he was also super spiritual.
He was.
Because he had an encounter with some kind of a spirit being.
Yeah.
I mean, that made him the high priest.
Exactly, yeah. So Eliphaz read his Bible once and went to Sunday school. So that has given him the ability to tell you why you're wrong. All right? So this cycle goes over and over, and Job is going to respond, no, that's not right. No, I never broke anyone's arms, right? Like these are unfounded accusations. So now we get to Bildad. Bildad is the second friend. And Job chapter 8 verse 20, I think, is a good example of Bildad's argument. He's going to echo the same thought by saying, behold, God will not reject a blameless man, nor take the hand of evildoers. So Bildad is really more of a zealot, right? So Job chapter 8 verse 20, this is This is the beginning of Bildad's kind of conversation, his argument that he's creating. Bildad believes that the horrors of our world are self-deserved, well-deserved punishments for wrongdoing. When something bad happens, it's justified because of how bad the world is. This is seen in Job chapter 8, when Bildad is going to accuse Job's children of sinning, and therefore they deserve the punishment. So obviously, Job, you didn't know your kids all that well. They did something wrong. God saw that they did something wrong, so God took their lives. Okay? That's kind of like Bildad's approach. When humanity endures suffering, it's because they deserve it. And whether we like it or not, whether we can conclude this or not, suffering is going to improve society. Okay? When the dams begin to break in New Orleans and the city is flooded with water and the death toll continues to rise, I heard from quite a few people that it's because of Mardi Gras. So because of the sin from the city, God literally poured out his judgment. I heard the same thing when the Twin Towers were hit. Because America has turned its heart over to the almighty dollar and turned its back on God, God has allowed this stuff to happen. All right? So Bildad might be represented by a church that pickets funerals of fallen soldiers because of American policies. Right? So because of this, we believe this. But again, we have to remember, this isn't the case. That this isn't why this is happening to Job. Right? These friends are trying to come up with the entire wealth of wisdom and trying to provide sufficient answers to a very difficult question. And so Eliphaz has fallen short. Bildad has fallen short. So maybe Zophar, the third friend, is going to pull it all together. Okay? So Job chapter 11, verses 14 through 17 is a good summary of his argument. It says, "If iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and let not injustice dwell in your tents. Surely then you will lift up your face without blemish, you will be secure and will not fear. You will forget your misery. You will remember it as waters that have passed away, and your life will be brighter than the noonday. Its darkness will be like the morning." Okay? So Zophar is kind of like the religious zealot, but he went to seminary and believes that Job's whole problem is that he just has a lack of clarity. Okay? And the reason that he doesn't have clarity is because he's not as devoted to God as he should be. If you were closer to God, you would know exactly why this is happening. And Job is saying, I thought I was doing okay, right? So what's going on? And so Zophar is going to pray that God open Job's eyes, and that the reason is because Job hasn't been fully devoted to God. And so time and time again, Job continues to swear innocence. What do we think of this so far? Right? This makes up a good chunk. It's about 31 chapters of the book. It's this friend, and it's this deep poetry where they're accusing, and Job's saying, no, this isn't it. And Job seems to be getting worse and worse, falling deeper and deeper into despair. He writes this poem about how he regrets the day that he was born. And he's crying out to God, saying, God, I want answers. And instead of God answering, he's hearing the voices of these other people. What do we think about that? Gotta find some new friends.
I think they're trying to wrap their head around why these. I mean, imagine if you had a friend and all this stuff happened.
Yeah.
That would be hard to.
There's no other explanation other than it's got to be your fault.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah. What do you think that does?
What you sow.
Yeah, you reap what you sow, right? Yeah.
I'm surprised Job didn't take his life. Yes, because they're kicking somebody when they were letting us down, but they are really down.
Yeah. Job is crying out time and time again. Yeah. What do you think these kind of answers will do to somebody's faith life? Not super great, I'm imagining, right? Let me give you a true story. Young couple had a child out of wedlock. And they eventually got married, and everything was okay. The child is diagnosed with cancer, and it's terminal. They retreat back from society, and they blame themselves and their action to have this child before marriage on why the child has cancer, right? They are encapsulating these bad theologies, and they're trying to make sense of it. And because this thing that we did is this, then this child is hurt and it's broken. But again, we know that that's not the story here. We know that that's not the case. So we're going to talk about this at the end, but just keep in mind that this is a person that we're talking about. And when you have people that are coming to you with questions and difficulties and challenges, you don't necessarily always know what they're coming to the table with. So be careful not to be an Eliphaz, a Bildad, or a Zophar. Okay? Now, throughout all this time, Job is saying, God, please answer. God, please answer. God, please answer. After Zophar, or I think it's Bildad is the last one. After Bildad's the last one, Job falls down and he just says, God, I need you to show up. I need your answer. And God doesn't show up. Not yet. There's one more friend that comes in, and his name is Elihu. There's some interesting stuff about Elihu. He's not an Israelite. Nobody's an Israelite. It's happening in a completely different land, but he seems to be the only one with a Hebrew name. And Elihu is going to argue that God is just, God is good, and God might give suffering as a warning or to teach us. So Elihu is saying, I don't know why this is happening, but he does condemn Job for accusing God of wrongdoing. Elihu is the only friend that starts with the correct premise, regardless of what we think about his conclusion. Elihu is the only one who's starting with, okay, Job, let's say you're telling the truth. Your children were fine. You're blameless. Let's come to a different conclusion. Let's try to figure this out. And so this is the only time with Elihu's conversation, that's why there's a little asterisk here, where it's not a back and forth. It's a monologue where Elihu is going to put his post in the ground and he's going to say, okay, let's say you're blameless. Just because you're blameless and this happened, that doesn't mean that God is bad. So let's try to come up with some stuff, right? Maybe God's trying to teach something. Maybe God's trying to show us something. Still not a great answer, but at least he's starting with the right premise. And then he puts his foot down and says, no matter what we come up with, no matter what answer we give, if we can give an answer, you cannot conclude that God is bad. Of all the things that are true in this case, that cannot be one of them. And so after Elihu is done, Job has no response. Now, either Elihu has made his case so well, or Job is defeated completely. We don't really know which. I'm guessing it's probably the latter, right? He's out of words, right? He's overwhelmed. He's got all of this stuff going on. So finally, God shows up. God responds. Out of the whirlwind, in the midst of Job's despair, near the end of the book, God finally speaks. But when God speaks, it's in a way that nobody would really expect. Okay? Job is a book that is unlike many other books for many reasons. One of the things that sets Job apart is that this is one of the longest speeches recorded in the Bible specifically by God, right? And it starts with him showing up and he's questioning Job. And so it's the answer that he gives, he begins it with a question. Instead of expressing pride in Job, delivering a lecture on the necessity of human freedom, Instead of God explaining the result of the fall of Adam and Eve, instead of God responding with kindness or even compassion, God flips the table on Job right out of the gate. Instead of answering the question of why, which is what Job has been asking, or how, or what am I supposed to do, or what did I do wrong, God ignores dozens of chapters worth of questioning, worth of debate, worth of struggle. God sidesteps all of these questions and answers the question of who, not why or what. He asks Job, who are you? He asks Job, who am I? Until you know a little bit more about how the physical universe runs, Job, don't tell me how to run the moral universe. If you're so ignorant about the wonders of the world we live in, the things that we can see and touch, how are we going to sit in the judgment seat, judging and condemning God? What grounds do you have to sue God? Let him who is about to accuse God consider the greatness of the one being accused. That's out of the starting gate, right? So after all these questions, God shows up and says, let me ask you some questions, bud, right? And so God's response is he takes Job on this amazing and beautiful, almost virtual tour of the universe. He shows the grazing patterns of animals. He shows the birth cycle of other animals. He shows the intricate complexity that, Job, you have lived your whole life looking at this small piece of the puzzle. You can't even comprehend the full thing. Where were you when I wove together all of creation, when I poured out the oceans, when I designed the very land that you walk on? And then I love that God is sarcastic. He says, I'm waiting. Right? Go ahead and answer. What were you up to when I poured out the oceans upon everything? So God's response, is here in your book, is that the world is complex, more complex than we'll ever understand, including the principle of what we consider to be justice. The world is beautiful and it's amazing and it's even good, but it's not perfect, at least not yet. And it's certainly not safe. So the way that God concludes his argument is just as weird as how he starts the argument. He explains two different creatures. Do we remember the creatures?
Yes.
Yeah. The behemoth and the leviathan. Right? And so we don't know if these are mythical creatures that are trying to be created out of some sort of imagination, or if it was a well-known mythical story, or some people think that this is the crocodile and the hippopotamus, right? Because it says that he has a scale, he has armor that's impenetrable, right? Hippopotamuses don't look like they should be that athletic, but right? But here they go tumbling through, right? And so the story is like why when we're at a zoo, why we don't pet the kitties, right? Because they're pretty, they're majestic in a lot of ways, but they're not safe, right? So they're wild. You have a crocodile. Why would you play with a crocodile? Why would you want to pet a hippo? Right? To see if you can, right? And then we have the audacity to be shocked when we're on the way to the hospital, right? Like
I just want a hippopotamus for Christmas. That's all there is.
It's about that time to ask for your hippopotami, right? So what he's saying is that the world is good, but it's not perfect and it's certainly not safe. Okay? So if you choose to build your house in a place that's called Tornado Alley, if you choose to build your place on a sliding tectonic plates, if you choose to operate to whatever degree in the world, it's not going to be safe. There are things that can happen. And so we see that our world is not designed to prevent suffering. Our bodies are not designed to prevent suffering. We don't have armored skin and Teflon veins, right? Our bodies are designed for a specific reason. To give God glory, to better further his kingdom, to love God, and to love others. Okay? What do we think about this before we go any further? Before we get to the epilogue? How do we process this stuff?
So sometimes we may never get the why on this side of eternity.
But we will always know the who. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I don't like that.
I agree. I've noticed something though, and this is going to be a little bit challenging, but let's challenge together, okay? I have noticed that a lot of us, myself included, we operate within a bell curve of acceptable suffering and death. Okay? The closer that we get to that area, the easier it is for us. The further away we get from that area, the more we suffer, the more difficult it is. Let me give you an example. If a 10-year-old dies, God is unjust. He is not good. I will not dedicate my life to him. He is evil. A good God would not take a 10-year-old. 20 years old, pretty much the same answer. 30 years old, they had a kid. How could you do this, God? 40 years old, they're just going. It's too early, it's too soon. 50 years old, they just met their grandbaby. They had so much life to live. 60 years old, Lord, I don't understand. I'm going to miss them. They had a good life. 70 years old. They lived a good life. We're going to miss them dearly. There's going to be tears and sorrow, but we're so grateful for the time that 80 years old. Still going forward. 90 years old. 100 years old. Lord, I just had someone in the congregation say that her mother's turning 101.
Wow.
Right? And she's saying, this is amazing, but she takes more pills than I know how to count. Right? 110. Lord, they lived a good life. 120. God, we're starting to break some records here. Right? Somewhere along in there, it has become acceptable that God is divine and that God is in charge. We're going to change that if the person was good. We're going to give them a little bit more of a cushion. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. If they're a jerk, it's probably going to be less time, right? Yeah. But we have this idea that if it's in this realm right here, then God, you have the say in it. God, you are the God of that. Anything outside of that, no, God, this isn't according to my plan. This doesn't make sense. God, how could you do this? And so the closer that we get to that, it seems to be that the harder it is for us. It's typically easier to be at a funeral for a grandfather or grandmother than it is for a grandchild. Right? It's because we believe that the world should operate in a certain way. And any time that it doesn't, we have to figure out why. We need the answers in order to cope with it. And so we operate with this, okay, God, let's keep it in here. Let's keep it in an acceptable range. Right? One of the most powerful youth lessons I ever taught, one of the 16-year-old her grandmother was a nurse, and she was beginning to sow the seeds of hatred against God because her grandmother suffered for years before she finally went home. So the bell curve for her was God should have took her sooner to have prevented the suffering for her grandmother, because my grandmother helped people her whole life. Why did she have to suffer like this? So the closer that it got to the middle, the easier it would have been for my student, right? And so we operate the world as it is, and we try to look for answers and to try to squeeze the sponge for as much as we can get out, even if it's not there for us. In the epilogue is just as short and or long as the prologue. We get one chapter. And we get Job's reply, which is, he finally says, Lord, you know more than I do. No knowledge is withheld from you. We are but dust and ashes. He's humbling himself before God. But here's an interesting piece. Chapter 42, in the middle section here, verse 9. God condemns Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar. So God is seeing and listening to these answers, and he's saying, he's condemning them for coming to these conclusions. So not only are they the wrong conclusions, they are damaging, they're hurtful, and now God is saying, these aren't acceptable. And so Job offers a prayer and actually helps his friends who have been pretty nasty to him the whole story. But we don't see anything from Elihu. Elihu's not condemned. So I think we could probably take that to mean that Elihu may not have been right, but he wasn't wrong in his processing. So whatever we make of that. At the end of the story, what happens? Remember what happens at the end of it?
Job doubles up.
He gets double of everything, right? Double portions, everything's good. Some people will ask, what about the kids? Okay? Job starts with 10 and he ends with 10. So what happens there? He gets 10 new children and that makes up for losing his children. That doesn't seem to make sense to any parents that I've ever talked about. Right? Having 10 new children probably doesn't make up for the suffering. The two most likely conclusions to this, and we aren't given this, but the two most likely conclusions are, Job is comforted by knowing that he will see his children again in heaven. And so he has 10 here and he has 10 in heaven, so the whole family will be together. Or God brought the children back and gave them to Job. And the daughters specifically are twice as beautiful as they were before. Whatever we conclude, Job was okay at the end. And so he's settled. Everything is okay now. What do we think of that? One last before we jump to the conclusion here.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable?
Yes.
No?
I think if I was Job, I would have been just happy for God to say, it's not your fault,
Yeah.
Job.
Yeah?
Exactly.
That would have brought me peace to know I've lost everything, but at least it wasn't me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a challenge with that too, though, right? It wasn't me. Why did you?
Who was it? Who was it? It was her.
Yeah. Just don't ask any questions. Job, keep your mouth shut. We're fine now, right? So Job gets everything back, double portion, double the land, double the crops, double the cattle, right? All these things that they would attribute worth and wealth to. His children are happy, healthy, and safe. We're introduced, I think, to 3 different kind of theodicies here. Okay? So we're adding a little bit more to our toolbox. One is divine retribution. We get what we deserve. Now, although the friends are presenting this, and it's wrong, we also see that this is in Scripture some places, right? That sometimes we suffer the consequences, not just you rob a bank and now you're arrested, but God also seems to have a consequence for certain people at certain times as well. I'm thinking of the Canaanites who were destroyed because they were evil, right? I'm thinking of the flood. I'm thinking of a lot of situations where there is actually a case for this, right? So divine retribution assumes that God blesses the faithful and punishes wrongdoers, right? In this view, humans have been given free will, the freedom to choose, but not freedom from the consequences of their choice, both horizontally with our relationships and vertically with how God responds to us. Okay? So if they violate what God has commanded, then they're subject to pain and suffering. Right? This pain and suffering isn't evil, but is actually going to be necessary for righteousness. A lot of times, it is in the form of a prayer that we present this. Lord, I hope that they hit rock bottom and they see that you're the rock at the bottom, right? We hope that they experience life in such a way that you are the only answer and that you bring them out of it, okay? We see this in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, through the exile, right? Disobedience to God directly relates to pain and suffering. All right, so Job displays that although pain and suffering can be used of God to punish wrongs, it's not always the case, and it's pretty damaging and harmful when we jump there, right? The story of Job and how God responds to the friends says that even the unwarranted suggestion of divine retribution is damaging and evil and puts you at odds with God. And so what I say is, if you think that somebody is being punished by God because of what they've done, and you've done the prayer, and you've read the Bible, and you've gone to church, and you asked the pastor for guidance, and you've gone and done all these things, you probably should still keep your mouth shut. Right? Another flip to this. I've seen how people will conclude this about their own suffering.
Mm.
This is happening to me because of this thing I did in the past. Here's how I would answer that. I'm going to sidestep divine retribution and say this. If something bad happens in your life and you automatically go to something in your past, then you may not have made that right. That may not be why you're experiencing what you're experiencing right now, but it is clear that something is going on either in your conscience or the Holy Spirit is bringing something up. So if you have a bad thing that happens and you automatically conclude it's because I lied or cheated or stole or something like that, then maybe this is your sign, your time to make that right with the other person, with God, with yourself. That's not saying that this is God smiting anybody, but it is saying that if you're automatically jumping to something from your past, ask the question of, have you made that okay? Why would you jump there automatically? Okay? We also get this theodicy of education, right? We suffer so that we can learn and so that God can teach us something. This isn't going to provide any comfort, right? That's not the goal of this one. The goal of this one is to learn from it. It's trying to answer what God is wanting us to find out through this particular event, right? One version is saying that God allowed this for us to learn something. So I think we can try to pull wisdom and we can try to pull knowledge out of a bad situation. And in that way, we can try to make it okay. It's not going to provide comfort, but we can learn from it. And more than that, we have the ability to teach others from our mistake. So if something bad happens, look for how we can give this over and have something glorious and light come out of this. The final one is exactly what Pastor Dan said, the most frustrating one. We may never know the answer, right? The answer might be too complex. It doesn't mean that the answer doesn't exist, but that we may never find it. And like spending your whole life looking for the Holy Grail, you're going to come up empty and you're going to be frustrated. So it's not about the what or the how or even the why. It's always going to be about the who. That's why we spent a whole session last week covering who we're talking about. Because whatever conclusions we come up with, from now until we meet the Father in heaven, we can come to the conclusion that God is powerful, knowledgeable, present with us, and good. That's what we can fall on. Okay? So we only have about 15 more minutes to get through 2 more books of the Bible. Right? So just know we're going to move through this quickly, but
I just want to say the why.
Please.
Sometimes the why, if God does tell you the why because we're human, it doesn't it doesn't fix things. Because of the hurt, the loss, the hurt. So not always knowing the why doesn't fix it.
Yeah, sometimes getting that medical report, you take a pretty substantial step backward into how you're doing with your day, right? Because you found out why all these things are happening, and now you're stuck with, well, what do I do with the why now? Right?
It doesn't fix it.
Yeah. So, a part of the education of theodicy could, and the mystery of theodicy could be that for our own good, God doesn't tell us. I have been in some weird situations, some really bad situations, that there is good ministry that goes on here. But if God told me I was going to be there, I wouldn't have even gone out of bed that morning, right? But God used that. I didn't know, but I did know that God was with me. I did know that he was good. And so in the middle of that situation and that circumstance, if God had warned me what I was walking into, I'm going to turn my alarm off, right?
Yeah.
But I go through that, and God strengthens me through it. Okay. So we're gonna look very briefly into the wisdom books of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Through this, we're introduced to a host of wisdom sayings given to us by Solomon. Early in his life is Proverbs, probably later in his life is Ecclesiastes, which is why there's this kind of shift that we'll see, right? The views that are emphasized here is that sometimes there's no way to know what exactly God is working on. The human knowledge may not be enough to fathom the limitless knowledge of God, but we have some say in this. That's especially what we get in Proverbs. So if you're looking for what should be the next book of the Bible that I read, I'm very regularly going to suggest Proverbs, right? Because Proverbs is a to-do list to have a good life. It's a checklist to go through. It helps by defining what a good life is, right? It doesn't mean that it's peaceful and that we're happy all the time. But Solomon breaks down life into a formula, which is so awesome, that although it's not simple, it's manageable. Okay? So because we're short on time, I'm not going to do the round robin reading. I'm just going to read through these. These are some of the Proverbs, right? Solomon starts with the most important foundation to build. The fear of the Lord is the beginning, right? This fear is not shaking. It's not trepidation. It's not, you're not going to get out of bed. He's not going to come out of the closet and scare you. It's more like respect. Going back to that kitty at the zoo. Beautiful, amazing, majestic. I have an appropriate fear that if the gate somehow is open, I'm not going to be anywhere near that zip code, right? It's because I have that proper respect. It's the respect of God, the reverence of God is the beginning of knowledge. It goes on, Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. 10:9. When there are many words, sin is unavoidable, but the one who controls his lips is prudent. Yeah.
Oh my.
Speak less, listen more. Proverbs 13:1. A wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scorner does not listen to rebuke. 22:24. Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor with a wrathful man. 23:6. Don't eat the bread of a man who is stingy. Do not desire his delicacies. 24:1. Be not envious of evil men, nor desire to be with them. There's an enormous amount of Proverbs that talk about how important it is to keep your close inner circle, and who's in that inner circle, and then the medium circle, and then the outer circle, right? Be careful with who you give your heart to, with who you spend your time with, who you listen to, who you give advice to, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Good stuff in, hopefully good stuff comes out, right? 16:9. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. 18:24. A man of many companies may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. That's awesome. 27:17. This is like in every Christian blacksmith and forge and home decorating, right? We say this pretty often. Iron sharpens iron, and just as one man sharpens another. Okay? Proverbs 10:27. The fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be short. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Those two last ones, I kind of snuck in there, right? Do we find that these Proverbs always prove true?
No.
Absolutely not.
Okay, a lot of no's. Give me a little bit more. Give me some more words. No, but. No, why? Why are we answering the way that we're answering?
There's a lot of wicked men that live a long time.
Yep. Yep.
We know good people that are suffering in their lives have been cut short.
Very good.
Some are barren and some are struggling as we speak.
Very good.
It depends on the people and who it is and how they're living, and it varies from person to person. Christian to Christian,
Yeah.
varies on their faith.
Yeah, that's good.
And on the non-Christian as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going with it, what Dave said, there's an author named Nabil Qureshi, one of my favorite authors. He was a Muslim who converted to Christianity, and he was converting hundreds. He dies of cancer at 34. Stalin lives to be 74 years old, kills millions, right? That doesn't seem good or right? So the Proverbs are always advisable when applied in the right circumstances, but they are neither promises nor guarantees, right? So while these are good general principles, those of us who have observed the real world are going to say that they're not always true. There are children of good parents who choose the wrong path. There are good men and women who pass at an early age, and wicked people live for an incredibly long time. Okay? So instead of making promises, the Proverbs tell its readers that the best path to a desired end, if everything was equal, is to do these things. If you follow the advice given, it's going to increase the likelihood of living a good life and staying on the right path. And then we flip the page. It's funny to me how many people say Ecclesiastes is their favorite book of the Bible. That's like, I've heard 5 or 6 people out of all of the books, Ecclesiastes, right? Ecclesiastes seems to have a different take on life. It's likely written later in Solomon's life when he becomes bitter and upset, right? Ecclesiastes is the exceptions to the rule book. It's why we had a resounding no all over the table, right? In the book of Ecclesiastes, we see that evil men prosper, good men are punished, life is short, and hard work doesn't always pay off. Okay? The beginning of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, says, "What does anyone gain from all their labor at which they toil under the sun? Meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." Awesome, right? We all have that one friend, right? When their parking spot is taken at Walmart. Everything is meaningless, right? So it's interesting here that the word meaningless probably doesn't mean meaningless. In Hebrew, it's havel or habel, and it means vapor. It's the actual translation of the word meaningless is vapor. Like vapor, life twists and turns in unknown ways, and then poof, it's gone. Seems like a paradox, right? It seems like this question that doesn't quite make sense, right? You see it, but you can't feel it. It disappears, and then there's no trace of it, yet it was just there. This is, this is how...
Because we labor, and we do everything to make a living, and we store up, and we do all these things, but for what? Nothing.
Yeah.
Literally nothing. What do we gain when we die? Nothing. Yeah. What do we do every day, really, for what we have? Sometimes we have nothing, really.
It seems a lot like the book of Ecclesiastes. That's a good
vanity.
For all is vanity. So what Ecclesiastes is going to do is it's going to talk about a couple of big things. One, time. Time is a big part of Ecclesiastes. It's going to keep ticking. No matter how hard you try to make it stop, it's going to keep going. We are going to keep getting older and older and older, but the next generation is born. And so although time is nobody's friend, it can sometimes be a partner, right? What we do in the grand scope of things might be smaller than what we like to imagine it being, okay? And so it's also, he's going to deal with death. Death is something that we experience that we're going to have to deal with at some point. That is a part of life. So whereas Proverbs says all these things, Ecclesiastes argues that the whole duty of man is to bring things under the cause of Christ. The conclusion of Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14 says, "In the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. So if you were to summarize the purpose of Ecclesiastes, he's going to walk through all this difficult stuff, all these hard observations, the observations that we make every day. Why? What's going on? Why is it that someone who is young and healthy one day is now not that, and someone who is old and evil continues to be prosperous and win the lottery and get all these other things, right? The whole duty of man is to fear, respect God, and to keep his commandments. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or whether evil. So we can be puzzled by the mysteries of pain and suffering, but Ecclesiastes shows that there is still hope for the righteous in that one day everything under the sun, everything under him, will at one day be made right. So Ecclesiastes really is more of a giant question mark. Proverbs' life is easy and it's accessible to us. Let's do these things. We should be memorizing the Proverbs. We should be holding the Proverbs close to our heart. Have that be our manual for how we get up in the morning. But then, when we have a flat tire, even though we just checked it, or something happens, we get sick, even though we take care of our bodies, we can hold to what Ecclesiastes tells us, that ultimately everything is brought under the Lord. So together, the books of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, they represent this duality, these two aspects of life in the face of pain and suffering. Yeah, it's wise to make good choices. Let's be people who make good choices. Let's be people who follow biblical principles, who seek wise counsel, read our scripture, pray, go to church, have a community of like-minded believers. Unfortunately, this doesn't necessarily mean that life will be great, as shown in Ecclesiastes, that will be seen as successful from the world's eyes. Although pleasure, protection, power, and provision may be gained or lost entirely in this life, life will be unsatisfactory apart from God. I think we answered that last week, and I think, Dave, you asked that question about how, what about people who gain everything, right? People who are evil, who don't follow the Lord, but yet they've gained the whole world. And I think the answer that we as a class concluded was anything like that, any benefit, any happiness, any joy, that's going to be a much more surface level experience than in the absence of God. This is why we have people that are successful by every metric, by every measure, who are on antidepressants and who hurt themselves and who have a terrible view of their own life. And yet how we can have people like we read about in the Bible, or missionaries who are in prison right now, who are singing joy in their prison cells. Because ultimately, all of these things, apart from God, are going to be unsatisfactory. That's who we hold in our hearts, and that's what we hold dear. Is there anyone from this set of tables over here that wants to present anything, any concluding thoughts? Okay. So the last question, as we close it out, it's a processing question. You don't have to do it here. You don't have to do it tonight, but you can also join if you're joining us online. Do Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, does this change our view of suffering? Does it broaden it? Have we opened a window? Do we get a little bit more of a view? Especially since the questions that we have been asking and that I've heard in my pastoral ministry are the same questions that were asked thousands of years ago by these same people who are experiencing difficult times. Any other concluding thoughts, Pastor Dan?
Just making it more complicated.
Yeah, we're going to keep walking through this together. So next week we're going to cover the book of Habakkuk and Luke chapter 13. So with this session we covered 3 books. Next week we'll cover 4 chapters. All right, Habakkuk's only 3 chapters, and Luke 13. I'm only going to cover half a chapter, but I think there's enough in there to go over. So thank you for those who are joining us online. We'll see you next week.